Um, so I wanted to very quickly make a sort of an appeal to any conservative audiences or audience members, and ask the question: how will climate change affect immigration?
Good question. It'll affect immigration in a way that will tend towards more border crossing. And I think it's a great point that you raised because we've heard a lot of talk, especially right when Trump came into the White House, regarding immigration and refugees in particular. And, we're already seeing massive amounts of environmental refugees. In fact, there's more environmental refugees today than there are global. I'm sorry, than there are political refugees. 30 million people, I believe it is per year, about a person every second getting displaced due to some environmental disaster, environment related disaster. And that number is projected to grow to about, I think the number is 50 million people per year by 2050. It's incredibly important to recognize that the refugee crisis is one that is heavily immersed in climate change, and you can imagine the disruptions to agriculture and things that climate change will impact that are going to directly impact the tendency to cross borders. There's actually a strengthening of border control that's occurred over recent decades, not just in the Trump administration, but even going back earlier. And that's projected and will likely increase. This gets back to climate change being an environmental justice threat. It's going to be more difficult to probably get into the more developed Western nations as climate change continues to destabilize nations in more agricultural sectors and those economies that depend more heavily on climate sensitive economies. And I think it's something that conservatives should definitely take side of, because natural disasters, as I mentioned, national security, food security, these things all play directly into the tendency to cross borders. And we can expect to see greater numbers of refugees as we continue to see the climate crisis unfold.
So just staying on that sort of train, how will climate change affect businesses? How will it affect the economy? This is something I hear talked about a lot.
Yeah, so the business impacts are going to be variable, of course, depending on the industry you're talking about. There's real opportunity for businesses to grow under a climate mitigation, climate solutions path. We see a dramatic opportunity for more jobs if we pursue renewable energy in wind and solar and so on. And the flip side is, with climate impacts, we have the potential to see very catastrophic economic impacts. With what we're seeing right now in Texas, with what we saw, the tens of billion, these hurricanes that hit cost tens of billions, in some cases over $100 billion of damage. And if you look at the recent, so there's a list that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration basically maintains, which is the list of billion-dollar disasters. So a natural disaster that causes $1 billion or more to the U.S. economy. This goes back to 1980. If you look at the number of billion-dollar disasters dating back to 1980 into present, you see in the first decade, second decade, the earlier decades, you get about 5 of these disasters per year. Now it's about 15 disasters per year. And
Oh,
sorry,
did we lose?
did we cut off for a second? Yeah,
Just for a second, but yeah, you're good.
I got a phone call. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. So, back in 1980, that first decade, we had about $1 billion disasters per year that would take place. And now we're seeing on average, I think the 5-year average is up to 13 or so of these $1 billion disasters. The per decade costs have increased, and this is inflation adjusted, have increased from about $125 billion in the decade of the 1980s to now at the close of 2020, $750 billion due to these natural disasters alone. So,
Wow.
yeah, astronomical economic impacts just directly due to natural disasters. Of course, not everyone is a climate-related disaster, but you see a trend of increasing natural disasters, of increasing climate-related disasters, and increasing, consequently, economic impacts associated with those. So this kind of gets back to the notion that we don't have a cost-free alternative. Under no
Yeah.
pathway do we get to avoid costs, and there's staggering costs associated with climate change. That's
Yep.
just natural disasters. There's still a couple 100,000 people a year dying prematurely in the United States due to air pollution, and of course, globally, we're talking over 3.5 million just related to fossil fuel air pollution alone. If we were to curb fossil fuel use, if we were to reduce the amount of fossil fuels we're burning, not only do we get to address climate change, but we also get to address the toxic pollution that's prevalent throughout the United States and elsewhere. And in turn, reduce the public health related costs associated with disease.
Yep.